true life. Anybody looking for true life? I don't want false life. The wisest path is the path of spiritual wealth. And Jesus describes that path in the next verse. Listen to what he says. Store up for store treasures in heaven where moths and rust cannot destroy and thieves do not break in and steal. In other words, the wise path is making investments that will last forever, like laying up treasures in heaven. And that's what Jesus would encourage us to do. And that's how you become rich towards God, which begs the question, well, how do you do that? How do you lay up treasures in heaven? I know what it is to lay up treasures on earth, to buy more stuff and accumulate money in my accounts and all that stuff. But how do I become rich towards God? That is a great question, and I'm glad you asked, because we're going to answer it today. The answer is actually found in the book of Galatians chapter 5, a letter that Paul wrote to a group of Christians in Galatia, the church of Galatia. And the context of this verse is that Paul was talking about how in the Old Testament they were under the law, but since Jesus came, he fulfilled the law, and we're no longer bound to the Ten Commandments, and we should still live them out. They're still good things, but we don't relate to God anymore through the law. In other words, we're free. And so this is what Paul says in Galatians chapter 5. For we have been called to live in freedom outside of the law, brothers and sisters, but don't use this freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Another version says, don't use this freedom to indulge your flesh, to live a selfish, narcissistic life, an ego-centered life. Don't do that. Don't use your freedom to do that. Instead, here's what I want you to do. Watch this. Use your freedom to serve one another, say it with me, in love. We're trying to answer the question today. How do you turn physical money, earthly money, into spiritual treasure? Here's the answer. Write it in your notes. Paul tells us. We turn earthly riches into spiritual riches by serving people with the motivation of love. Serve. Don't use your freedom to satisfy yourself and your own sinful nature. Don't live a self-centered life. You're going to end up like the rich man, the fool who dies and is bankrupt before God. Imagine being a billionaire, a millionaire, multimillionaire on earth, and you show up in heaven and you're bankrupt. It's poverty. Don't do that. Instead, use your earthly riches to lay up treasures in heaven that will give you eternal dividends. Serve people with the motivation of love. This is exactly what the Apostle Paul tells Timothy to do in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Listen to what he says here. He says, tell them, now we got to pause here real quick. Who is them? In the verses before this, he calls them the rich people. Rich people. Do you think of yourself as a rich person? Rich people. In the United States, we have a little bit of a warped view about what rich is, But when you think globally, because we're now a global society, the global average household income is just shy of $10,000 a year. It's $9,733. That's the global household income, average. The average income for a United States family, a husband, wife, two people, is $75,000. So if you have two people in the home and you both work, you are, 7 times richer than the average person in the world. So if you don't think you're rich, well, you are. Now, if you're like, well, I'm single, I only make 50 and I only make 40. Well, you're just 4 times richer than the average person in the world, 5 times richer. So you're still in the same boat. So when Paul says tell them, he's talking about you. Everybody? He's talking about me. Okay, so when we think globally, we are the rich folk. Ready? He says, tell them to use their money to do what? To do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. Can it get any more clear than that? Like, this is what we need to do. Those of us who have more, we should be ready to share. We should be generous to those in need. And when we do that, listen to what Paul says. He quotes Jesus. By doing this, what is this? By helping those in need, being generous, being rich in good works, by doing that, we'll store up their treasure as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience this thing called true life. Anybody looking for true life? I don't want false life. I don't want to live my whole life under this false narrative and then die and God says, you fool! I spelled it out for you in the Bible. You totally missed it. You wasted your time living a self-centered, ego-centered, narcissistic life. You used all your money to buy yourself more stuff. You fool. That's what the world tells us to do. True life, the real narrative, is using resources to help other people. And in doing so, Paul says, you are laying up treasure for your future. We always think about, well, maybe we're not always, but a lot of us think about the future and how we need to take our money now and invest it in our 401k and put it in this so that in the future we can retire. We're thinking about the future while we're alive, but what about the next life? What about after you die? Paul says there's a way that you can actually invest your money so that it pays eternal dividends when you die and go to heaven. And when you do that, you experience true life. This making sense, yes or no? So, yeah, hopefully it's getting clear. Now, as a byproduct of that, this true life, it's not just about, doing nice things for people or helping people so that you can have a great time in heaven. That's part of the deal. What about right now? Does living a generous life and giving to others and being rich in good works, does that help my life right now, the quality of my life right now? Well, the evidence is in and the research has been done. It absolutely does.